Colin, maybe you'd like to comment here. You've done some considerable work with students. Are we fairly well on target here?
Yeah, I think so. I teach kindergarten to grade five in my school, and I find I usually get into recording, say, with grade threes. Grade three is kind of where I start to do it more independently. And I do find that almost any writing can be ported into the audio realm with some help. You obviously have to change it for the spoken word, but any kind of writing form that teachers are doing, it often works very well. Poetry to persuasive writing to how to's or things like that. So you really, in the language program, there's a lot of options for you there. I just think sometimes it's kind of hard to find examples of kids' work that your kids can listen to first. Like it's hard to take apart something at their level. Some of the things for younger kids, I mean, a lot of podcasts are done by older kids, so the concepts are a little harder for them. So once in a while, you find a classroom work about something and just hold on to that and you know, reuse that as an example of here's a model of what it could sound like. How did they do that? Where did the music come? Did it come at the beginning, at the end, all the way through? So I think that's kind of what I do. I tend to start with grade three, and then four or five. They're really quite good by then at doing it fairly independently.
Okay.
I think the only thing they're not great at is the analysis of their work afterwards. They're very quick to, I'm done, I'm finished. It's great. And then when you kind of listen to them, you're like, well, maybe you could have tweaked that or tweaked that. They don't like to go back and revise too much, but they are ready to go, I would say, by three, four, five easily.
Thank you. Okay.
Do you have them editing at that point too?
Yeah, I'm lucky enough in my lab that I have a Mac lab and I use GarageBand and I by then for sure they're able to do that. But I've gone through before they get there, I go through a number of activities to lead them up to editing their own work. For example, I'll record a bunch of stuff that I'll make mistakes in. They'll chop it up and put it in the right order or things like that. Or I might start off with some interactive activities where we go home and write a bunch of jokes. And we come back the next day and we'll record those jokes and add the sound effects, and in that kind of fun kind of way they'll learn the basics of editing and recording and things like that. And we'll talk about
Okay.
you know
Let's
uh,
let's move.
the quality of how to make your voice sound better if it's too quiet or loud or whatever they need, and they learn pretty quickly actually.
What I found hard to get used to when I started doing radio many, many years ago was I would work so hard when I was working for print on crafting a sentence that is just really, really elegantly put together, and I had really, really nicely crafted clauses, and it's maybe longer than a lot of my sentences would be longer than I can write for radio now, because the thing is, simple is much, much better when it comes to writing. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to dumb down your language, but the sentence structure is best when it's conversational. So, for example, what they used to say in broadcasting school is they would say, if you have to take a breath in the middle of the sentence, you have to redo it. And this doesn't really this is I'm talking about when you're crafting a script. When you're talking to someone and doing interviews, it tends to flow pretty naturally. But when you have a script, one of the hardest things is to try and cram. It's natural to try and cram too much information into one sentence, and it's just way too much. It's like sentences get convoluted, and your listeners don't get lost, and you tend to, it has to do with rhythm. It has to do with being clear, and so simple language. What they used to say is if you put a comma in the sentence, there's a good chance it might be too long. And I've analyzed my own writing sometimes, and it's really true. If I put a comma in the middle, it's usually because I'm putting a clause in the middle, and that means that, first of all, it's going to be harder for me to deliver because it's like I could get lost in my own meanings. And so I think that avoiding clauses is a good way to look at it. And also, the simple subject predicate sentence. It doesn't feel very glamorous to people who really like writing novels and who are really, really into the printed literary word. But it's like beginning a sentence with, as I may have said, that would be fine because that leads very clearly into something else. But yet, at the same time, it's like if you begin with an incomplete thought. I don't know the exact technical term because grammar is not ever my strongest. But generally, short declarative sentences are always better than more complicated sentences that have a lot of punctuation in it. So the other thing is too, one thing that's a tip, you have to write for your own voice too. And this gets a little bit difficult when you write for other people's voices like I've done frequently in radio, because sometimes I'll write something and then they'll change it because that's not the way that they would say it. And the thing is, that's really important that we write the way that we talk, because if we don't do that, then when we're delivering the script, we're going to stumble. And so I usually take it, if I stumble over a sentence more than twice, I usually figure that there's something wrong with the way I've written it. So I always go back to write it. And so I would say those are the main points about writing for the ear. And then, but the script also has to be written in such a way that it sounds spoken and not sounding read. So when we get into voicing, then we'll talk about just how to not how to deliver it in such a way that you have a script in front of you, but it doesn't sound like you're going from a script. Speaking, when you're doing a podcast, it has to sound natural, but it's actually a performance. So what I tend to do, and what I coach people to do when they're doing a speaking for a production like this, is first of all, don't get too casual. Like right now, I'm getting a bit too casual, and so it's reminding me that what I need to do is I need to remember this is the audience out there. So what I do sometimes is I'll stand up to deliver my script, because then my rib cage doesn't cave in, my back is up, my shoulders are straight. It's a lot like the way that you breathe when you're singing. And I wouldn't say, like, I think when we're singing, we always, breath teachers will, or singing teachers will sometimes say to really breathe in deep. And the thing is, you want to be natural, so you don't really, really want to, do the big operatic breath or anything like that. But the thing is, just taking in enough breath that you're not going to run out of steam. And if your sentences are short enough and well structured, then you're going to be able to take your breaths naturally. So I would say natural breathing. And I sometimes do voice warm-ups myself. I find that, first of all, one thing I'm going to do right now is take a drink of water, because that's something that's really important. So when my mouth is dry, I get tired more quickly. It's like my mouth takes on some really, strange characteristics that don't sound very good. I think the biggest thing is to being relaxed but being focused at the same time. It's really hard to talk about what that's about, because you don't want to be too uptight, but you don't want to be too relaxed. So it's like finding the balance. Let's see, what else do I do? I listen to myself. And that's one of the things that I think is one of the biggest advantages, one of the biggest things that you could encourage your students to do, is to listen to themselves after they've done a couple of takes, and then they'll critique themselves. And it's only when they hear themselves that they're really, really going to hear what's different. And some of the things that people tend to do, and I know I tend to do it, I talk too fast sometimes. Sometimes I think that I'm putting a lot of emphasis on my script, but really I listen back to it and I think that doesn't sound very emphasized at all. That sounds flat. So what I find is that when I'm performing a script, I think a lot of emphasis goes a long way. You have to really, really push it and really overemphasize before you start to sound unnatural. So I would say what I like to do with people is to really push them really far and say, okay, now read this as though you think that you're just going to sound totally goofy and totally over the top. And they'll listen back to it and they'll go, that wasn't over the top at all. That was really, that was really good. So I think that we can push ourselves a lot as far as emphasis and as far as color in our voices. Speaking too fast and too flat is, I would say, two of the worst things or two of the more common errors that people make.
I find with elementary kids, what I do is again, I'm a prep teacher, so I see them kind of once a week, and I probably don't have as much time as I would like with them. So when they do some writing, it's mainly the idea of speaking that writing to each other, like pair up, and before you record, read that to a friend and get some feedback that way because it's going to come out orally. Does it sound okay? And then I try to give them, if you're the listener, give them some tips on feedback. You want to say something nice, like, hey, I really like the way you made that point, but you know what? I got kind of lost at the end, or something like that. You know, especially with elementary kids, that uh, to get that feedback and analyze their work and change they're not always so quick to do that.
The other thing is too, it's making eye contact is like one of the best ways to stay connected to your audience. So even if they're sitting there and their eyes are totally glued on their script, it's like encouraging them to look up and also to know what they're saying well enough that they can do without having to have their eyes glued to the page. I think that's I mean that's going to be tough for a lot of people, but that's I think an ideal to work towards.
Okay.
I glue little clothespins on my computer monitors, and they throw their paper up so they can kind of talk and not have to turn the paper over.
Right, and
So,
do they make did you encourage them to make eye contact with their other classmates and look away from the paper once in a while?
not so much.
Mhm.
Not so much. No. Well, that's a
Yeah.
good idea. That's a good tip.